What we're going to be doing today is doing a Reg G tier list, and I'm going to be ranking these based off my own thoughts. If you guys agree or disagree with this tier list, please let me know. But these are just my thoughts. I tend to not put too many mons in these really highly rated like S and A tier categories. And for the most part, since I think most of these mons are usable, you're going to see a lot of the things in like the B and C tiers. But what I'll be doing my best to do is going down and breaking down why I'm putting these in their tier, talk about some of their strengths, some of their weaknesses, what they do to like matchups overall, the popularity and viability of these Pokemon. So hopefully you guys like this sort of thing. If you guys want to see weekly tier lists, think about letting me know. And yeah, here we go. Your Miraidon team has almost an auto win versus common Miraidon teams. I would say your Miraidon team is pretty good. So let's start this off with Miraidon. Let's just start talking about Miraidon here. So Miraidon is a really good restricted. It's one of the best in the format. If we talk about Miraidon, it has the Hadron Engine ability, and it sets the electric train when it comes in. And Miraidon, what it does that's really nice is it provides a lot of team support. It's going to be enabling Pokemon with the Quark Drive ability to get boost to a wide variety of stats. And the difference between Miraidon and Koraidon, let's just kind of talk about this here since we have both these mons up. You know, Koraidon sets the sun when it comes in. Miraidon's going to be enabling Pokemon with Quark Drive to get speed boosts. I think that's the most important thing. If they can get speed boosts off things, which I really do like. Obviously, you can enable things like Iron Hands. You can also use it to activate like seeds. Electric Seeds for a draft is really good. But like being able to give a speed boost to an Iron Treads, to be able to let it outspeed and check other Miraidons, giving a potential speed boost to an Iron Bundle that's holding a Sash, attack boost to Iron Hands, but like a speed boost to Jugulus, a speed boost to Valiant. That's the value here versus like Koraidon when it sets Sun. That's mostly increasing damage from teammates like Chi-Yu and stuff like that to be able to go for like big heat waves and things. Yes, it can increase speed on some of the photosynthesis mons, but in reality, like the only photosynthesis mons you're really going to be seeing that would be used on that team would be like as sweepers with the speed boost would be like Flutter. So I think Miraidon just provides a little bit more support, and also the secondary effect of the Miraidon as opposed to the Koraidon is the electric terrain. It's going to make it so you don't have to play around sleep powder. None of your grounded mons can get put to sleep. Versus Koraidon, the secondary effect of that is it cuts the water attacks. And if you're using a bunch of bulky mons like Koraidon, Raging Bolt and stuff like that, you don't really care that you have that weakness. You're welcome to the stream. So, I think Miraidon is a really good mon. 135s on the special attack and the speed. Same with like a lot of the other mons in this format. You're going to see Koraidon is the same speed tier. Things like Shempow, things like Fluttermane all have that same 135 speed tier. This thing also gets Electro Drift, which is going to deal 1.3 additional more damage when it's super effective. It's a really strong move. The common sets that people like to use with Miraidon are going to be Choice Specs. Like Choice Specs is how a lot of people play. They put things like Choice Specs. They have Volt Switch. They definitely have Draco Meteor here. And sometimes they put like a Discharge here. Sometimes they go Fairy Terra just to be able to check other Miraidons and go like Dazzling Gleam. That's a very common Miraidon set. So I think it's a very solid mon. If we were to talk about other popular ways that Miraidon gets played, you normally see Miraidon in like a 50-50 situation with Whimsicott here, or they even have like a Farigiraf. And you don't really know if they're going to be playing more like Tailwind Miraidon, pivot out into something like an Ogerpon Fire or like an Urshifu. You could use Ogerpon or Urshifu here. Or if they're going to go into a little bit more Trick Room game with something like Iron Hands and closing out with a Blood Moon. So Miraidon is really cool mon because it can kind of play a little bit of pseudo. This is like the Tail Room, the best Tail Room mon, because you have to respect Tailwind here to enable things like this, and even this to some extent, but also like Trick Room is still really good because like these two mons can just close, a little bit of redirection, you know, it's pretty nice. So I think Miraidon is a very solid mon. I would definitely put Miraidon in the S tier. I think Miraidon's definitely an S tier mon. While I'm not the Miraidon aficionado that I think a lot of other players are, you know, you cannot deny that Miraidon has the results in Reg G. And I think it's a really good mon, especially if you're looking to like learn a little bit more of the format. You should definitely try Miraidon to see if it fits your playstyle because it's one of the Choice Specs mons that can actually like pivot and unlock itself and repin things. It's a little bit, I'm not going to say easier to play Miraidon than Shadow Rider, but I will say that like you have a little bit more defensive options with a Specs Miraidon than you do with a Specs Shadow Rider. Alright, I'm looking around, watching Pokemon streamers. Brand new to Pokemon, I've been playing for a month. Scarlet was my first Pokemon game. Well, welcome. Just sit back, relax. Hopefully you'll learn something. We're going to take a look at Mewtwo next. Mewtwo is a bit of a mixed bag. It's a perfect example of like power creep in these formats. And if you guys want more tier list stuff and you want more meta analysis breakdown, think about letting me know. It's a question of the day. Should we make more like meta-analysis, like weekly tier list videos? I think we could. There's definitely a lot to learn. So Mewtwo is really cool. It gets on Nerve and Pressure. Both are viable options, but you see how it's like completely speed crept. It has a little bit higher special attack than things like Miraidon, but it has lower speed, which means it's not only slower than things like Miraidon and Koraidon, but it's also slower than things like Shenpao, Fluttermane, and a bunch of other mons. We also just explained that a lot of these mons utilize those terrains and those weathers to get speed boost. So like Mewtwo, it's kind of up the creek without a paddle. It does get access to Psy Strike, which is going to be basically a more stronger Psy Shock. So that's pretty nice. I think Mewtwo has a decent matchup into some things like Terapagos in some situations. But in reality, like Mewtwo is a one-dimensional single-target attacker that honestly just kind of loses to like Urshifu. Like Scarf Urshifu existing, either form really just gives Mewtwo like the hardest time. Common ways to play Mewtwo that I've seen that give some viability of like success is going to be things with like Indeedee. So you can go like Indeedee and make Mewtwo sort of like a AoE attacker with Expanding Force. And you're going to see the female Indeedee more than the male Indeedee in Reg G just because it's a little bit more reactive and it takes away the fact that you have that auto loss to things like Urshifu, right? You're also going to see potential Tailwind setters. You see a little bit of Tornadus on that team. There's the Urshifu we were still talking about, so you can then check their Urshifu with your Urshifu. So this is a pretty common core if you're going to be playing Mewtwo. And then from there, I think that there are two other mons that you definitely want to think about checking out. I would definitely go Shenpao on this team because Shenpao is going to use that Sword of Ruin to potentially help them lower their defense. So you can actually use Psy Strike with Mewtwo, so Mewtwo becomes like a big mixed attacker. It's a pretty cool thing. Mewtwo also, I'll say, if you want to go Rain, like Mewtwo does get like Hurricane. I think that's like the coolest thing ever. I don't know why it even gets this, but it's so cool. So you have like these mons, and you have like a completely free last slot to do basically whatever you want with. You have your Tailwind, you have your Speed Control over there, you have Redirection, you can go Imprison Trick Room on this. You could throw like almost anything you really wanted in this last spot, and I think that would kind of work on a Mewtwo team. Some people like to go Amoonguss. There's nothing really wrong with just throwing like a random Legendary on there, like Landorus, Fluttermane, things like that definitely work. I've even seen Roaring Moon on this team, and I think that's like a really, really cool team because it makes a good pivot for Mewtwo if you're afraid of like dark attacks. But you know, you're still weak to bug. But I think it's a cool option. I've also seen Dragonite there. But yeah, I think this is a pretty cool team, and Mewtwo, while not great, it definitely has like its matchups where it can succeed. Some of its good matchups, like I was talking about, are going to be things like Terapagos. If you're playing it with Torn Urshifu, you have some decent matchups against things like Groudon and Koraidon. Mewtwo is decent into some of the lesser utilized restricteds. It's decent into things like Reshiram, Zekrom. It's pretty bad against things like Solgaleo and Lunala. It's usable against Zenta in some situations, but it's really going to struggle against things like Shadow Rider, Miraidon, even Kyogre to some extent, give Mewtwo a really, really hard time. So I would put Mewtwo... I would put it in the B tier, and I think that that's being very generous. And that's just because Mewtwo can do so many different things. You can play it Scarf, Specs, Orb, you know, you can play it a variety of different ways, and it has a lot of options. But at the end of the day, it's very one-dimensional. You would be hard-pressed to win a best of 3 with a Mewtwo team. I think, like, you could, if you were going to a regional with Mewtwo, you would probably, and let's say it was 8 rounds, you would probably go 3-5 with, like, 4 of your 5 losses being in game 3, which means you're really close, but like there's not really a reason to use Mewtwo over something like a Shadow Rider. So wish Mewtwo got the Mew treatment. It knows pretty much everything. It would make sense. I mean, it could, but I mean, that's Mew's niche, right? For like singles and stuff like that. What about using on the ladder? So like I said, on ladder, it's totally usable because like it's just Cheese Factory. I've also made like Mewtwo teams on like Sun. That's the cool thing. Mewtwo actually can capitalize on a wide variety of weathers. It gets access to like, it gets access to Solar Beam. I've used Solar Beam Mewtwo in the past. It gets access to like Fire Blast, like super crazy like aggro Sun Mewtwo. It definitely works with like the last mon over here being like a Jumpluff and make this into like an Urshi Dark, make this have like Sunny Day, right? And then you just like melt people with those sort of things. You know, I think it definitely can work. So the ability to do a little bit of everything makes Mewtwo usable, but just not great. And I think that's fine. I don't think it has to be broken. What's up? I'm hyped for the new Reg G. Which mon do you think will take the meta? That's what we're going to talk about today. What we're doing right now is going over a tier list. And I think a tier list is very important, especially one that you kind of keep updated. And this is, I think everyone should make their own tier list. I don't think you should just listen to me. I think if you're things you agree with or disagree with, that's completely fine. But once you know what things you think are busted, then the next step in team building is building teams to check specifically the top teams in the S and A tier. You could really care less about the matchups over here just because these mons aren't going to be prevalent at actual events. You want to figure out what mons you think are good and why you think they're good, so then you can start taking them apart in your own team building sessions. And there's nothing wrong with just having teams for ladder. I'm trying to help people that want to get good. So let's talk about Lugia. Lugia, for those guys that know, is one of my all-time favorite restricteds. I built a few Lugia teams, and I almost actually took Lugia to the World Championships. I really, really like Lugia. I think it's a really, really cool mon. Lugia is an example of a system mon. So a system is different from like a regular team in that there's going to be things that you want to set up to get the game to a neutral state, and then from there, you know, you can try and outplay your opponent. It's a very safe mon in a lot of situations. So Lugia is very safe, but it's definitely very reactive. So what I like to do with Lugia is basically lead like Lugia and Sableye, right? This is going to let me set things like light screens, reflex, and basically just wall people out. And then from there, you can come in with things like Comfey and just go for Triage boosted floral healing to heal up your Lugia every single turn. Remember, it has that multi-scale ability. While it's at full, it's not going to be taking massive damage. You can't really one-shot it, which lets you go for Calm Minds. And again, I really like to run the Covert Cloak on the Lugia. I think this is a really, really cool core. You can even add things like Rillaboom on this core to set the grassy terrain to make it so when you go Fairy Tale on your Lugia, which is a very good defensive type on it, it makes it so Lugia can like heal from the grassy terrain, but also grassy terrain increases the healing of floral healing as well. So you can also add things like Ogerpon, right? Ogerpon Rock to be able to have a sturdy redirection mon, and even add something like a Pelipper to be able to help with the Kali Ice matchup, which is very, very problematic. So this is a really, really cool team. You say 90 base special attack is so sad. Well, that's the thing, is like you have Calm Mind. Like honestly, you can get this mon to +6 every single game. And it's this 110 base speed tier that actually lets it outspeed Urshifu and bully all the other things, very similar to like an Origin Form Palkia. Do I think Lugia is broken? I do not think Lugia is broken, but I think that there's definitely viability in Lugia, and it has decent coverage. And Aeroblast is a really, really cool move. Being able to have a high crit ratio to go through other stat boosts means you can kind of just trade with Terapagos, and eventually you can try and crit it, right? You have a lot of options for critting, even with like Ivy Cudgel here. So I think that Lugia is very, 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 very nice. But I do think that, you know, it's one of those mons that's like really, really reactive. And if your opponent's playing like Choice Specs, Choice Band, like full aggro all in, it's going to be dicey. You can get your face shoved in pretty hard if they know what mons to nuke. So basically the way to beat Lugia, for those guys that don't know, is I said I wanted to use like Sableye and Lugia. And for example, I can go like Light Screen and then like try and Calm Mind or something like that. Or Reflect and Light Screen. And if you just nuke this Sableye and say I only get one screen, you can then exploit a hole that's in another part of the team, because now I can't really pivot because now I'm a mon down. I got to bring up my Pelipper or Comfey a little bit earlier than I wanted to. And you kind of just, you know, rush me down. Do you factor in having versatile leads in Reg G, or is it almost always figuring out your optimal lead to pair if you're restricted? It really depends on if you're going to be playing in like a best of 3 open team sheet, or if you're playing like on ladder. On ladder, you want to figure out the more optimal pair first, but in, you know, open sheet play, you can kind of have a little bit more options. If you EV this mon in speed, do you just go for the base hundreds? You're talking about Lugia? Lugia's EVs are all over the place. It's all over the place. It's hard to explain. But the fact that it has base 110 speed is really, really nice. And you can outspeed things like Urshifu and other base 100s. It's really, really good. If you're talking about for best of the OTS, like I think that you're probably going to want to have... I have a lot of videos on my main YouTube channel that go over how to... It's an exercise where you can find out every single lead combination. There's 16 different lead combinations, I think, for every single team, and you need to know what all of those are and know the synergy and where you're ahead and behind with every single one of those. Maybe we make a new one of those videos and go over it, even though I've already done that for Reg G numerous times. But it's really important to know what every single lead combination you have does and doesn't do, so you can use it to leverage what your opponent's going to do and how they react to it. You actually can throw game one in a lot of situations, trying to steal a win to get your opponent to think that you don't know or do know specific things about a matchup that you either do or do not know. It's actually really important. That's a whole other topic for a whole other video. But Lugia, where would I put it? I think Lugia is definitely still a B tier mon. I think like the fact that Lugia is a system, if you understand how the system works, like I said, get up your screens, it's very safe. People that don't even really know that much about VGC can play Lugia to decent results. You see a lot of the same things when you see like Mux Smeargle. That's another system. You want to get the minimized stacks on the Mux. Is it annoying to play against? Yes, in some situations. Is it a low IQ team to play? Yes, it is a low IQ team to play, but sometimes like those things work. And being able to like get yourself into the late game, that's where like the skill can actually come in to see like where you're ahead, where you're behind. The fact that you're not auto losing to a wide variety of these makes Lugia okay. But at the same time, you don't really have the tools to hang with again. So Lugia, very similar to Mewtwo, it's going to really struggle with Miraidon. It's going to struggle with Shadow Rider. It's going to struggle with a couple of the other like high value restricted Ice Rider. So like Miraidon, Shadow Rider, Ice Rider all give Lugia a hard time because they all have super effective moves into it, which means it's going to cost you your Terra. And so if you have to Terra turn 1 regardless of what is even happening at all for any reason, you are on the back foot. So that's why it's not higher. It might even be a C tier mon, but I like it a lot. So I think Lugia is in the B tier. This video is going to take me a million years because I'm going very in-depth on every single mon. Let's talk about Koraidon. We already briefly talked about Koraidon and how it differs from Miraidon in that what Miraidon does with its Quark Drive is it enables its teammates versus Koraidon is giving itself and maybe one of its teammates a damage boosting steroid as opposed to like that speed boost. So Koraidon is very good, right? I fought 3 Koraidons at Worlds. And this is probably going to be the point when everyone stops watching this video. It's the exact same mon as Miraidon. It's a 135 base speed, 135 attack instead of special attack. It gets built with things like, I like it with Flame Charge. Obviously, you want to have that protect on this thing. Mostly people like to go Fire Terror here. And again, they're double dipping on their strengths. They usually go like Clear Amulet. And then they go something like Collision Course, which is going to be the same as the Miraidon signature move, but for fighting physical. And then the last move they use is Flare Blitz, because they're double dipping the fact that they have Fire Terror. Really, really cool stuff. They usually build this thing with things like Flutter Mane. So they build with like Flutter Mane. Sometimes there's a Chi-Yu here. And then from, not Chimchar, Lamau. Chimchar busted though. Chi-Yu, going to be able to correctly have options here. You still sometimes see like a Whimsicott or a Tornadus. I like the Tornadus in a lot of situations, but Whimsicott's also viable. You have Tornadus, you can also throw things like Urshifu, right? Urshi Dark is very good there. You can even throw something else like Shenpao there. I think that Shenpao is good right here too. So like this is kind of standard Koraidon play, like aggressive options. You don't really have that many options against Trick Room. Your options against Trick Room are trying to nuke them before they Trick Room you, right? Thoughts on Bandy Koraidon? Too one-dimensional in this format. Koraidon, the issue with Koraidon, which I'm going to talk about right now, is that it's one of the good restricteds that loses to random non-restricted mons. So for example, you could be like, yes, I have Koraidon, I'm so good. And your opponent's like, cool, like I have a Flutter Mane, like you have to Terra. And if I get you to Terra, that's a resource that you can't do on your restricted. So that means when I use my restricted to pressure your restricted, you lose, right? So the thing is, Koraidon becomes sort of like a Terra hog to not lose tempo versus other non-restricted mons, which is not good, right? It's protect the king, but the king is like trying to go out in the middle of the chessboard from like the very start of the game. And it's very, it's a double-edged sword, you know what I mean? Yeah, the fact that Koraidon powers up its hard counter is rough for it. I would agree, right? So I don't think Koraidon's like bad, but I think like Koraidon does struggle with a couple of the other highly valued restricted. So like it's going to have it's a not great matchup in Miraidon in my opinion, because Miraidon usually goes into a neutral Terra like Electric or Fairy, which could be even a resist, and then Koraidon goes into like Fire, which still, you're actually you're losing your resistance to what Miraidon does, right? So it's not good. And then against like Shadow Rider outspeeds and just pins really hard. Against things like Ice Rider, well, the issue with Koraidon, similar to Mewtwo, is that it's roughly a single target attacker with all of its stuff. It relies on its teammates to do that AoE damage, and you honestly just can't break like a redirection Trick Room with like Koraidon. So it's up to you to have the right teammates to still pin those things and then maybe flip the Trick Room, but then like it puts a lot of pressure on your teammates to succeed, which means like it's basically leaving its teammates high and dry. So this is where everyone's going to hate my list. I'm going to put it in the B tier, and I'm not going to organize these in the B tier in any specific way. Like if they're in the B tier, they're in the B tier. Koraidon's obviously better than things like Mewtwo and Lugia, but I do not think that Koraidon is like an A tier mon. I think that there are too many holes in it, and I think that it's too easily influenced by non-restricted mons to actually like have an impact at like the highest level. And that being said, I fought 3 Koraidons at Worlds, which was like not on my bingo card at all, and I think I went either 1 and 2 or 2 and 1 against them. Like Koraidon was a matchup that I didn't put as much thought into as I probably could have. But that being said, like I don't really think you're going to see a ton of Koraidon at the very start of Reg G, because it's one of those mons that like there are so many other things that you could play with and use and try and make work. The Koraidon's one of those things that people come to once they've exhausted all of their other options. Like, this guy's different. How can I make this work? It's obviously good, but it's like a diamond in the rough type thing. Looking at this, Mewtwo should probably be in C. No, I think Mewtwo's still in B. I think Mewtwo's still fine. If you actually take a look, Mewtwo has the tools to pin. All right, Mewtwo can lock up some non-restricteds. Like, it can lock them up hard if you have the right Mewtwo set with the right team. And it basically, if you have the right team with the right matchup, so it's hard to explain. Like, Mewtwo can definitely work. I'll have to show you guys how Mewtwo works, I guess. I'll have to show you guys how Mewtwo works. Mewtwo's better, the better that Zenta gets, the better Mewtwo gets. That's the best way to explain it. The more balanced and reactive, if people want to lean into like Zenta and Ogre and things like that, Mewtwo will actually, it's good enough to be in the B tier because it has enough options. Let's take a look at Groudon next. Groudon is going to be the next one we're going to take a look at. Groudon, similar to Koraidon, sets the sun, right? But Groudon is very different. And I fought, my first round at Worlds was against Groudon. Let me make sure I'm doing this for Reg G, yeah. My first round at Worlds was against Groudon, and the guy that I fought used, he used Rocky Helmet, Wide Guard, Hariyama next to Groudon, and I think he made day 2. It was a really, really cool team. But I think Groudon is really, really good. It sets the sun, and it's a lot more reactive than things like Koraidon are. So, like, I prefer Groudon over Koraidon in every single situation, because it also has AoE options with Precipice Blades. You just got to hit your moves. 85% accuracy, you just got to hit your moves. You know what I'm saying? I think that Groudon can be played on a lot of different teams, and it can be played with like pseudo Trick Room options. Like, there are a lot of Trick Room options you can use with Groudon. People still like to play Groudon with like Clear Amulet in auto situations. You still even see sometimes banded Groudon see play. But like Groudon tends to see play a lot with like Tornadus, so you can still set that Sun with like a Prankster Sunny Day to outvalue things. You still sometimes see it with like Urshi Water or Urshi Dark, sorry, with like your Sash over here. And then from there, like, you could play it aggressive with like Pow, but I think Groudon leans a little bit more into like balanced play styles with like Rillaboom and Sin. And so you're starting to see like this sort of team come together. A team like this, where you have like your aggressive options, and then you have like your balanced pivot options, and you have like your closer over here. So I think Groudon's really good. I like Groudon a lot. I'm not going to put it in the A tier, but I think there are options for Groudon to do well. I think Pengi used Groudon at Worlds, or maybe at least in LA regionals, and it's good. It's a good mon. Yeah, you can use it next to coaching. It can still check things like Cali Ice if you just want to throw your Terra into it, and it can trade really, really well. I'm going to put it in the B tier, similar with all these other mons. I think that Groudon's definitely viable, but it's not one of those mons. Like, for example, Groudon's really good, right? We all think it's good. If I'm building a team for a tournament, let's say I had it up here, I'm not going to be dictating my resources to check Groudon. I'm not. I think that I will, just like at Worlds, I'll take my 1L to it and then never fight one again, right? And that is how these formats work. You really have to pick your poison. You have to say like, okay, if I'm going to be playing 8 rounds in a tournament, how many of these rounds am I going to be fighting the things that aren't broken, right? Like, we can talk about where all these mons rank, but the issue is like, we need to find out what's in the S and A tiers. We need to see like, okay, should we be using our resources to check the 1 Groudon player or the 5 Miraidon players we're going to fight in an 8-round tournament? Obviously, you're going to try and optimize your team to check the 5 Miraidon players and take the L to Groudon. That's just the smart way. That's just playing to your outs, right? Obviously, there's slight checks you can do, but I think like checking your S tier mons first and then your A tiers will lead to more consistent results over time if you're playing in like an open team sheet best of 3 tournament. So we're going to take a look at Ho-Oh. Ho-Oh is one of those mons that's a lot better on ladder than it is in tournaments, but it's similar to Lugia in that it has like a balanced playstyle. Ho-Oh is really hard to use in this format though, and honestly, if you want my honest opinion on Ho-Oh, the way to beat Ho-Oh, it has Regenerator, it has Sacred Fire, it has a great base stat line that's so fat, right? You time it. You just time the Ho-Oh player, right? Because if they want to add like a million defensive tools with like Sacred Fire, Recover, right? Things like that. If they're playing a reactive Ho-Oh, if they're playing an aggressive like Life Orb, like Covert Cloak, like crazy Ho-Oh, no, Rayquaza is never the answer. Don't ever use Rayquaza. If they're playing a reactive Ho-Oh with like, you know, a Moongus, like double Regenerator, Incineroar, like Intimidate cycling, straight up, you kill the Ho-Oh's teammate, and you have 4 mons, and they have 3, and you timer them, right? You just timer them, right? So that's the issue. And that's, I really think that that skill cap is like why Ho-Oh is never going to like win anything big, is because you can just time them. Because they don't have the offensive tools to break. Like if their team is like Ho-Oh, Amoonguss, and Sin, Grim, and you have like any semblance of a balance court, you just time them. You kill their teammate and their Ho-Oh can't do anything, right? That's just my opinion. That being said, Ho-Oh is still viable. If you were to take Ho-Oh to a regional or higher level event, 8 rounds, even a mildly competent player could go 4-4 with that. Because like Ho-Oh, you know, not everyone knows they can time Ho-Oh. They're going to waste their resources. It's like a boxing match. You know, when like you watch a boxing match and one player goes out like way too hard early and then they get gassed? That's Ho-Oh. You wait for them to be gassed. You wait for them to make a mistake. You punish, and then they can't ever come back. It's also hard to round out game 3s with Ho-Oh because once they realize that's what you're doing, they tend to slow down a lot. But Ho-Oh does have options. I think I would still put Ho-Oh. You're starting to see a pattern here. I put it in the B tier. It's a usable mon. It struggles versus some of the better restricteds, notably like Miraidon. Kyogre can give it some problems too. It's so sad to me how meh Rayquaza is with the other tools available. I love Rayquaza. Rayquaza is a lot better in Battle Stadium singles, but it's not that great in this format. You're honestly better off using like a Roaring Moon than a Rayquaza. But yeah, I think Ho-Oh is a good mon. I think Ho-Oh is good, but the fact that you can't... I think the fact that you can just time it with almost any team means that it's hard. It's hard for it. I think Ho-Oh would be better as a support mon surrounded by hyper offense as opposed to just a wall surrounded by support. I've tried Ho-Oh in like 4 or 5 different ways. It's rough because when you start looking at it like, well, I could just run it as like a pivot mon. So for example, if you want to relegate it to a support mon and you want to run it as a support restricted next to other hyper offensive tools, you could just run a Shadow Rider there. Like that's the thing, is like it's suboptimal in a lot of other situations. When it's leaning into its best qualities, which are reactive support playstyles, it doesn't have enough offense and it doesn't provide enough team support to actually do something. Like, so for example, instead of a Ho-Oh there, you'd want like an Eternatus, which you still can time Eternatus, but Eternatus has a lot more offensive pressure throughout the game than Ho-Oh does because it has unique defensive and offensive typing. Ho-Oh might be slightly usable in GS. Yeah, Ho-Oh's going to be a great like off-tank mon because like you can use it as like a protect mon that can just use to be like Tailwind / Sacred Fire like support for your team. It's going to be really good. Like there's mons that are really usable in the double restricted formats. But not in this one. It's just, it's a little bit too high and dry. It also gets locked up by Fake Out really hard. So you have to go like Cloak or Ghost Terra. And because like Ho-Oh doesn't really utilize Protect that often. So it's hard to use. Let's talk about Kyogre. So Kyogre is, I think, one of the better restricteds. And there are 5 or 6 different ways to play Kyogre. So for Kyogre, you can play it with a Choice Scarf. You can play it with an Assault Vest. You can play it with a Choice Specs. You can play with a Mystic Water. You can play it with a Life Orb. You can play Kyogre a variety of different ways. And they're all different. So like Ladder Kyogre is going to be completely different from Best of 3 Open Team Sheet Kyogre. It's so hard to play against. But Kyogre is a really good mon because the support monster Kyogre in most situations always look the same. We're not going to talk about the Woshien, Jugulus Kyogre. So I think everyone is familiar with that. I was just going to type in Justin Tang because he's the guy that popularized that, right? What's that mon? Jugulus. So this sort of team right here was really, really popular with Ogre. Lefty's Ogre is okay, but I don't think it's as viable in this format. Yeah, those 2 people really popularized this at NAIC last year. Very, very solid core with like Torn and Ursh and stuff like that. Really, 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 really solid. That's a good way to play Ogre with like an AV. That way you could like Pollen Puff your Ogre with the Woshien and cut damage to its weaknesses and stuff like that. Loving the stream. Happy to hear you like it. Welcome to the stream. I think a more standard Ogre with like, you know, stuff like this. I really like Urshi Water here, sorry. So like those plus like Goldango and Shenpao. I like this Ogre a lot. This is one of my favorite Ogres. You can put like a Mystic Water or a Scarf here. Scarf's usually really good here. Get your Sash here. So you have like your Water Engine here. You have your Kyogre and then you have like an Indeedee for a little bit of redirection / like protecting from like Raging Bolt. This is my favorite Ogre team. And I got points from a couple events with this last season. I like this a lot. I think you have a lot of solid aggressive options. Aggressive AoE, so you have AoE, single target, redirection, terrain control, speed control. You have everything you really need with an Ogre here. I would put Ogre in the A tier. Now, the reason why Ogre's in the A tier and not in the S tier is because things like Miraidon are so popular, and you are basically forced into going like a grass or ground Terra, just so you don't automatically lose to Miraidon because it's so popular. And the reason it's not in the B tier is because it's just better than these mons. Like, Ogre's built different. If you were to take a look at like any other tier list from like Sword and Shield, Ultra Sun and Moon, Omega Ruby, Alpha Sapphire, Ogre was the S tier undefeated. It was in a league of its own. So it's a little bit lower just because the power creep is getting a little bit out of control. But yeah, the fact that Miraidon checks Ogre with one of its stabs and uses its other stab to resist Ogre's base typing, it's still an A tier mon, and I don't give these A tier and S tier slots out easy. So the fact that it still gets that slot means it's very good. Rayquaza. We'll talk about Rayquaza in just a minute. I will say, if you guys are liking this list, what do you guys like this list? You guys having a good time? You guys enjoying this stuff? Would you guys like to see this same sort of list for Battle Stadium 3v3 singles as well? Because that is an option. You can check out the singles channel, drop a sub on that. It does not take any, amount of time to go drop a sub on this channel. Link to it is right here. We've been uploading daily on this singles channel. I'm trying my best to grow it. 466, we need to get to 1,000 subscribers, guys. Please help my Christmas work. If we can get to 500 before Christmas, I would actually be really, really happy. Again, the link to that channel is right here. Please go drop a sub. I'm going to go use the restroom. I'm going to be right back. So that means you have all the time in the world to go check out this channel. It'll take you like 2 seconds. Drop a sub. I'd really, really appreciate it. Watch some of the videos. If you guys want to see the same sort of in-depth analysis for singles that we're doing for this VGC stuff, I will do it. But we gotta get the sub. So I'll be right back. Rayquaza is a pretty cool mon. Rayquaza is pretty cool. I think a lot of people want Rayquaza to be good. Rayquaza, I used it on my 2nd place singles World Championships team. But Rayquaza, while it does have airlock, and a lot of people think like, oh man, if weather's really big with like, Groudon and Kyogre and Koraidon, I can just do Rayquaza, take away its weather. The issue is Rayquaza still gets checked by all 3 of those mons. And Rayquaza with airlock, so like if I have a Rayquaza and you have something like a Tornadus and an Urshifu, they're going to be like, that's cool, I don't care, Tailwind, kill your teammate. Or the fact that Urshifu just outspeeds this thing anyways means like, I don't care, Wicked Blow, you're dead, right? There's so many situations. Rayquaza notoriously gets massively checked by like every single non-restricted mon. And it doesn't like check anything at either. Like Abandoned Rayquaza doesn't really work. AV Rayquaza was usable in previous formats in some situations, but it's not great. It's better in a dual restricted format. It just doesn't really have a lot of viability. I think that I've used Meteor Beam Rayquaza and got some success on the ladder, but at the end of the day, this thing's a glass cannon that has to hold a sash, and unlike something like Calyrex Shadow Rider, it doesn't have any AoE moves. It has Dragon's Ascent, which is why I say it's better in singles than it is. Because in singles, you can just go like, Dragon Dance, Extreme Speed, and go to town. And for everyone saying like, oh, but like Choice Band, Normal Terra, E-Speed, Rayquaza, it's so good, right? It's so good. You have like 150 and you go like Normal Terra and you have a Choice Band and you can go Extreme Speed, and it's like realistically photographs on like most of the teams in this format. But even if you do all that, like we have this at home. That's not your man. That's a Dragonite. And you know what makes Dragonite better than Rayquaza is it gets inner focus. You can just intimidate this, right? You can just intimidate this Pokemon. It does not work, right? And also because of even though you have like 20 base attack on it, yeah, 16 base attack on this Dragonite, you're not like OHKOing a Kyogre with this. You're not OHKOing a Koraidon with this Normal Terra Choice Band E-Speed. Even if you like Helping Handed, they probably still live. So it's not really worth it. And you can say, well, you might be able to check their Urshifu. Okay, but like using your restricted to check up their non-restricted allows their restricted to hit both your restricted and your teammates restricted with an AoE move. You see how that kind of works? Like if I want to go Normal Terra and take out your opponent's Urshifu, that Shadow Rider is going to shove my face in with something, right? Normal Terra Rayquaza Choice Band. I was about to say we have Dragonite for that. It's like you've said in the past. You want to have Pokemon use something other Pokemon can't do. It's true. You want the things that make these things stick out is what makes them better. If you want an Airlock Mom with Dragon and Flying typing, that's not your boy. That's an Altaria, right? We can use the same things that would make Rayquaza useful with the Airlock and that typing on a non-restricted slot. A lot of the things that Rayquaza does are just being wasted on a restricted slot. So Rayquaza is the first mon going in the C tier. So I just don't think that it's like that great of a mon. So it's going to go in the C tier here. All right. Funny enough, there was an Altaria in Day 2 at Worlds. Well, there you go. See? You know what there wasn't probably in a Day 2 at Worlds? Rayquaza. The Rayquaza player was me playing Rayquaza in the singles tournament on the second day, right? Let's talk about Terapagos. Terapagos, if you want my honest opinion, I'm being so honest with you guys here about this list. I think Terapagos is probably like one of the best Pokemon ever made, ever. And I don't see why people don't just only use Terapagos. Like, I'm very surprised that the meta isn't 90% Terapagos and then other stuff. It's that good. I don't know why people don't use it. It's one of those mons where, like, I've tried it and it doesn't really gel with me, but like, I cannot really understand why this wasn't like the best thing ever made. It has a couple different abilities. So when Terapagos starts off, it's this little guy, right? And he turns into Terapagos terrestrial form upon its entry, right? And which also means you can't Ditto it because it's already in a different form. So that's also a really good thing about Terapagos. It can't be checked by Ditto. And then it has like another effect, right? It goes into this one. Sorry, it goes into this guy first. There's 3 different forms of the Terapagos, right? So you start with this one, you Terra Shift into this guy. This guy is Terra Shell, which is multi-scale, which means like Terapagos just comes pre-built with like a Calm Mind, basically. And there are multiple different sets for Terapagos. You can build Specs, you can build Power Herb Meteor Beam, you can build Lefties, which is very solid, right? Yeah, I think that Terapagos, the fact that it also gets Terra Starstorm, right? Isn't that what it's called? Terra Starstorm. So Terapagos, when it's in just its base form like this, it's just a solid like 120 base power move. Like it's a single target. But when you terastalize with this guy, that Terra Starstorm becomes an AoE move that hits everything for neutral. And if your opponent's terastalized, they get hit for super effective. So you can't defensively wall this thing. And when you terastalize with this thing, it removes all weather and terrain. This thing is like the most, like, why the hell would you ever use a Mewtwo over this thing, right? Like, could you beat Terapagos reactive team, like a protect the president kind of team? That's how people play Terapagos. And the way to beat that is to utilize like Urshifu just comes in hard versus this guy. Because like you can protect and they just go close combat. And the issue with Terapagos, which is why we can even have the conversation for why it's not the most broken thing ever, is because when you use Terapagos, it is the literal definition of a Terra Hog. It has to Terra to be able to be played correctly, which means your other mons can't Terra, right? So it's not unbreakable, but I feel like a god among men when I'm playing with this Pokemon. I have a few different Terapagos teams I almost brought to Worlds. I think it's just really good. It has a lot of good options. It likes to be played with Rillaboom. We're still doing our little thing here where we're fleshing out like other mons that it likes to be played with. Rillaboom to be able to, if you're playing that lefty set, like regain your health a little bit better. People like to play it with Fluttermane. Fluttermane with like a booster. And then they like to go like Icy Wind on it. So like Icy Wind here to enable your opponent's mons to be caught in this 85 base speed tier, which is a pretty decent speed tier. It's more power, faster than the 80s, not as fast as the 90s, but if you want to go full speed, you can actually catch a lot of things. So yeah, I think it's a really, really solid mon. You still obviously play it with like Urshifus and stuff like that too. So it's solid. Like I think it's a really, really good mon, and it has a great matchup into Shadow Rider. It's a really, really good matchup. It's the reason why Shadow Rider doesn't just break the game. I think the fact this thing is still very viable. So like I like Terapagos a lot, but I don't know exactly if I should put it where I should put it. Because like I'm going to put it in the S tier, and you guys are probably going to disagree with me, but I feel like it still has not been figured out yet. I just feel like this mon still has so much potential to just say like people don't get to play the game. Like for example, like this could be like an S plus tier mon. It really honestly could be like an S plus tier mon, but the meta just needs to settle down a little bit. Because like think about it. Miraidon, the other S tier mon, no terrain, you're weak. Kyogre, weather, no weather. No, it's like nope. It's like it sits in with these other mons. It sits at the table with them and also like checks all of them. Yeah, I feel like the meta, this is going to be the mon that gets optimized over these last few months. And like if we're going to be talking about like dual restricteds, this guy's going to be a requirement, I think, in GS Cup. But very, very solid mon. I think it's very, very good. Let's take a look at both Dialga forms together, just because I feel like they're similar enough. But Terapagos is like super cracked, I think. Very, very good. And there are ways to beat it. You can like Encore Lock it. You can pin it with fighting moves. But at the end of the day, like, Terapagos is the one it decides. Yeah, finals was Ice Rider versus Miraidon, yeah, of Worlds. So we're looking at Dialga. So if we plug in Dialga, you can see the differences between these two forms. They have same base speed. Origin form Dialga has 20 more base Spadef, 20 less attack. But it comes with the cost of its item. So you have to have this Adamant Crystal, which makes you get a 1.2 boost to your Steel and Dragon type moves, right? And so, honestly, Dialga Origin is bulkier, but this Dialga gets to hold something like a Citrus Berry, right? Or like a Mental Herb or something, or like a Chople Berry, or whatever you want. You know, leftovers, be whatever it wants to be. These guys are usually played on Trick Room teams. Dialga gets a bunch of solid options, like Trick Room's good, Flash Cannon is good coverage. This guy has good coverage. It gets things like Aura Sphere, it gets things like Flamethrower. It's a good check to Kyogre. It even gets like a Thunder to be able to check Kyogre. So Dialga is like the Swiss Army knife of just like Trick Room teams. It also has like a decent matchup in a Kali-I because you stab that super effective steel attack into it. So like Dialga is okay. I tend to like the Dialga Origin just a little bit more than regular Dialga, just because you can't get knockoff on this item, and knockoff I think is a pretty important way for a lot of teams to break through this sort of stuff. So I tend to like this Dialga just a little bit more, having that item that also gives me, I'm unable to be knockoffed, I get more Spadef and a 1.2 boost on my stabs. I tend to like that a little bit more with Dialga. But that being said, it's hard to one-shot Dialga. If you can build yourself to live through an Urshifu attack, Koraidon you can tear away. Not many things just like one-shot. If we take a look at like a lot of the popular mons that we're seeing here, Miraidon hits it for neutral or worse. Terapagos hits it for neutral or worse. Kyogre hits it for resisted. Talking about things like Shadow Rider, that's neutral. And you're bulky enough to live through all those things. Because again, special, special, special. You're going to start to see a pattern in the tier list where a lot of the mons that are really good are special attackers. So the mons that have a higher base Spadef are going to be a little bit higher rated than things that aren't. So Dialga is usable, especially the Origin form one. But I don't really think it's great. I don't think it's in the A tier. It can live versus things, but the correct amount of double up pressure means Dialga just gets folded, right? So yeah, you don't get, you can 1v1 one of these guys maybe, but the fact that you're always going second unless you get Trick Room up means you have to actually take a good chunk of your health getting up the Trick Room. And if you have the right mons that Dialga can enable, like an Ursaluna, you know, Dialga, both forms get the telepathy ability. You can enable like a Ursaluna to then be able to like Earthquake stuff and do a bunch of other things. And you'll be able to get that Trick Room up, but then you're like not really having your Dialga anymore because they're gonna trade with it the next turn. So you're basically trading your restricted to get up your Trick Room to allow things like a Torkoal or an Ursaluna or stuff to win. And it's a unique matchup, but it's rough. I would say Dialga and both forms just go in the C tier, and it's up to you which one you want to use. Do you like having a different item? AV Dialga is usable. Like I said, Life Orb Dialga was really usable in the past. I think it's a solid mon, but I think that like they're just B tier mons. And let's talk about Palkia, both Palkia forms now. This is one of my favorite restricted. So you see the Palkia, right? The difference between them is it has 20 less attack on the base form, and it has 20 more speed. And this makes Palkia one of the most unique restricteds on the Origin form side. 120 lets you outspeed a lot of different stuff. It gets access to it's Spatial Rend. Dialga also gets Roar Time, which is like a Dragon type Hyper Beam. That was better in Dynamax format. It's not good in this one. So Spatial Rend's really good. A high crit ratio. It's the same as Aeroblast. It gets Aeroblast. It gets things like Hydro Pump, doesn't get Scald. And then gets even things like Thunder. So you're starting to see like this is like a better check to things like Kyogre, right? It's a really good check to Kyogre. I will also say that like these both, Palkia does get Trick Room. The other form, the base form of Palkia is a more standard Trick Room setter with the same options. And sometimes they go a little bit more reactive with like leftovers. I've seen safety goggles on this guy too. It's usable. It's definitely usable, but it's just not great. You're starting to see a pattern. I would probably put them in the B tier. I think they're viable. I think if you were to play Palkia and Dialga in an 8-round best of 3 open team sheet tournament, you'd probably go 4-4, maybe 5-3. You might get points. But you're really going to struggle against people that know what they're doing with these S tier mons. Because what you're going to have to realize with the restricted format is with these mons down here, the reason why they're down here is they have to exude a ton of resources to be able to just play the game against these. For example, if I have Palkia or Dialga, I'm going to have to Terra just to not die to this Miraidon. And if I have to Terra, the Miraidon doesn't have to do shit. He could just Volt Switch me or my partner, and then like I wasted my Terra, and then they come in with the thing that pins what I Terra'd into and I lose, right? That's a big thing in this format is tempo and those sort of matchups. So once they flip your Terra on, you're gonna lose to something else. And so like that in itself just kind of puts these mons a step below the mons that are the very, very tippy top of the game. We already played Reg G before. Yeah, we know a lot of what's good. Yep, Volcarona was doing better than Frostmoth. I mean, Volk's good. Not in this format. All right. Most Pokemon... I completely spaced on the whole special attacker thing. Most Pokemon in this format are special attackers. It's all special attackers and, like, Urshifu, right? All right, let's take a look at both the Giratina forms now. Giratina is really cool. I like Giratina a lot. There's the Giratina, and there's the Origin form, which gets Levitate, which is a little bit different. Now you're starting to see little differences. And the Pressure with Telepathy one, which is the same as like Palkia and Dialga. They both have the same base speed tier. Giratina base form has 20 more Spadef and defense. It's a lot bulkier. Versus Giratina Origin just has more attack and special attack. And then Giratina Origin has to have the Grisius core, which is going to be very similar to the Origin form. This is, again, it's an Origin form. So it's going to be giving a 1.2 boost to your stabs. I like both of the Giratina forms a lot, and I think they're really cool because Giratina as a mon inherently has like some of the best bulk in the game. You're not just coming out here and dump trucking a Giratina. Doesn't matter the form. And I think that Giratina, if you give it something, especially on this Origin form, if you give it something like a Steel Terra, this is a great check to things like Calyrex Ice Rider because your Levitate's going to be able to avoid the high horsepower and your Steel typing resists the Glacial Lance. This also lets you like hard check Blood Moon Ursaluna and regular Ursaluna. So I actually think there's a lot of cool things that these guys can do. This is probably the best, one of the best pressure mons in the format other than Eternatus. Telepathy's also still good on it. I think they're both good. But this is going to be where you see a deviation, which I think this one's B tier because it does a lot of the same things. It checks the Kyogre. It has the Terra versus the Miraidon. But it checks things like Kali Ice and some other things. And this one's in C. I think that this Giratina is just a little bit too reactive and asks for too much permission. Like you could put a coaching on it and like you can do other things like that. But at the end of the day, this guy comes in really slow with like Shadow Force and just slow plays. And it falls prey to the same thing as Ho-Oh where you can just time it. In my opinion, you can just kill its teammates every single turn and time this Giratina. One thing though I was going to say is it has really, really good bulk. And like if you have the right Terra to solve a matchup and lock someone out of a matchup, they will never kill the Giratina ever. Which means you're probably going to get timed, but they'll never kill you. Yeah, I think Giratina, it sucks that it's C, but it's one of my favorites. So let's take a look at Reshiram, another one of my actual favorite Pokemon. Reshiram is a lot better in Dynamax formats, but it's also a lot better in dual restricted formats. But it's Turbo Blaze, which is basically Mold Breaker. It gets like Fusion Flare, which is going to be 100 base power move. You compare this with like Smeargle and have Smeargle use the respective Fusion Bolt and get the double damage, but it's not really that great. It's going to get Blue Flare as its main move. 130 base, 85. 20% chance to burn on that Blue Flare. Good move. I always seem to miss this thing. It still gets access to things like Earth Power, and it gets access to like Tailwind if you want to do that. There's not really that much of a reason to run something like a Reshiram though. It's cool. Like, I like Reshiram, but at the end of the day, like, 150 special attack's great. 90 is that same base speed tier that a lot of the other restrictors have. Yes, a B tier incoming. Maybe. I actually think Reshiram might be a little bit worse. Reshiram's probably like a C tier mon, I think. I like it, right? But there's not enough of a reason to run this thing. I think the only viable set for Reshiram might be something like Earth Power, Draco Meteor, some Blue Flare option, right? Let's sort it by special here. It gets like Ancient Power, Heat Wave, yeah. So like that, like this on like an Assault Vest set. And if this is what you're running, bro, like this mon, you're gonna see a similar thing with Zekrom. It's worse than Raging Bolt. Like that's not your mon. That's a Raging Bolt. Like almost same special attack, almost same speed. Yes, much less base defense, but way more base HP on the Raging Bolt, and the defense is almost similar, right? So it's like, I don't see it taking the slot. It's too reactive. It doesn't dictate play enough. And the only real value that I've gotten with Reshiram in like closed team sheet ladder play, you can say just use Chi-Yu. Yeah, I've used it on Scarf teams. And again, why am I using that? Why am I using a slower Chi-Yu when a Chi-Yu exists? So I would put Reshiram in the C tier. And that sucks, because I think it's as really unique defensive typing. Is one of my favorites, but at the end of the day, there are 5 or 6 other mons you would use instead. If you want it to be a fast, strong sweeper, you use Chi, you use Flutter. If you want it to be a reactive mon that soaks and then pins with like AoE and stabs, you use it as a bolt, right? Or you use Raging Bolt instead. If you want it to be like a weird, bulky, chunky Tailwind setter, we have a million of those, right? And they're still suboptimal compared to Prankster Tailwind setters, right? Because like if I want to lead Reshiram and like what? Like Urshi Dark and go like protect Urshi Dark that's sashed and go Tailwind to enable my Ursh. What they do is they just lead with their Tailwind setter and their other thing and they just kill my Reshiram. And it's like, well, or they forced my Terra and then I just lose. So it's like, I think Reshiram also really struggles with the fact that Incineroar is very, very big in this format. Let me also know if you want to see a tier list for the Pokemon that aren't restricted. Things like Incineroar, Urshifus, Raging Bolts, things like that. I can definitely try and make something like that happen as well. But getting back on topic here, I think Reshiram's just a C tier mon. It's pretty suboptimal in these formats. And we're going to take a look at Zekrom. And if you thought that Reshiram was similar to a Raging Bolt, well, this is like Zekrom's worse than Raging Bolt. Which, like, could Terapagos be used on balance type team? Terapagos is the balance restricted. That is the balance restricted for this format. This thing is worse than Raging Bolt because after you get intimidated on this attack stat, you're just shit. You're like so weak. It gets access to things like Bolt Strike, which is the same thing as Reshiram's Blue Flare, but physical and 20%. 20% chance to para, and it gets access to like what Dragon Claw. It gets like Scale Shot, you know. It still gets the same Tailwind. Like you can play it the same way, but like, why are you playing Zekrom? I love Zekrom. Me and Zekrom, we go way back. I cook with this mon too. I like it, but that's a skill difference. That's not like, why would you ever run a Zekrom over Miraidon? The fact that like you're trying to run the same Electric Dragon typing when everyone is over preparing for this means you're just asking for like a shit ton of like bad matchups because everyone's hyper focusing on beating the Dragon Electric thing, and then you have the Dragon Electric thing that actually can't even function at the tier of the Dragon Electric thing, and it just shits the bed. The fact that it still goes C tier is because it still like low-key checks Urshi Water in some situations. But at the end of the day, like, you have to majorly skill diff your opponent to win with this thing. I love Zekrom. And I don't think there's a single restricted that isn't one of these, like, Nebi forms that isn't lower than C. Because, like, we're talking shit on, like, Zekrom or Reshiram, but, like, these mons will give, like, all these mons will give, like, Cloyster, even Bastion, Gardevoir, Falapple. They will give them the business. Like, you got to be this tall to ride. Saucebook ain't doing shit versus Zekrom, right? You know what I mean? Like, if you're not a restricted, you don't get to play the game. Like, even Zard, you know, mon that's like really, really good in Reg H. Like, nah, like every one of these restricted just says like, nope, I'm you, but like way better in every way. So we can talk shit about Zekrom, but at the end of the day, like they still just like are in a league of their own versus the other not legendary mons. Let's talk about Kyurem Black. Kyurem Black's a pretty unique mon, I actually think. Kyurem Black, I was surprised to see no one actually bust this out at Worlds, because it gets something kind of cool. It gets Terravolt, which is the same thing as Mold Breaker, and it's similar to Zekrom, but it has slightly different defensive typing, being Ice, so it's a different stab. It has way more attack, too, 170. These guys have some of the highest base stat totals in the whole format. See, like, there's only a few mons that get this 700 level, and Kyurem Black's one of them. So it gets 95 base speed too, which lets it outspeed Groudons, Kyogres, Reshirams, Zekroms, all those other guys. The cool thing that I'm surprised no one really used was, like, this is one of the few ones that can be built on, like, the loaded dice with, like, Scale Shot and Icicle Spear. And this is one of my favorite sets. I think this is, like, really cool. This is, like, a super Baxcalibur. And I like it a lot. I think this mon's really cool. It gets access to, like, Dragon Dance, too. Like, it's just basically, like, a super Baxcalibur. It gets access to a lot of the same things. It still gets the Fusion Bolt from Zekrom. It gets just a wide variety of, like, really cool things. It's definitely, like, a usable mon. And I'm surprised more people just didn't use it. I'm surprised I didn't see, like, any play at Worlds. It can also be built, like, on an AV set. I also really think this thing can sometimes be built, if you're playing just on ladder, as, like, a weird special attacker, because it gets good special coverage. I think, does it get, like, Earth? It does get Earth Power, yeah. And so people just don't ever really see that coming if you want to build it with, like AV or, like, choice specs to build, like, a weird special attacker with, like, Blizzard. I like this mon a lot. I think it's definitely viable. I'm going to put it in the B tier. I think it's just a great mon. We're going to talk about Kyurem White. It's very similar. It does a lot of the same stuff. So Kyurem White right here. So you see they have roughly the same stats. Instead of the 170 in attack, it's in special attack now, which is really good because Kyurem gets like, you know, it gets the fusion flare. It gets access to like Blizzard. These are normally built on like Hail teams. It gets access to that Draco. And people tend to build this guy either Scarfed or AV on like really, really chonky, like balanced ice teams. It's its own unique team that doesn't really, it either really works or it like doesn't work. Like you can check like maybe their Miraidon or like their Kyogre, but you'll get folded by Shadow Rider. You're kind of just playing your matchups. Yeah, you still use the Kyurem Black Gengar team. Yeah, I made that team a while ago, and that team actually like worked. We used a lot of that in the past. I think this guy's good. It can be built with like Orb, AV, Scarf, Specs, a lot of different things. 95 base speed's good, outspeeds a lot of the other restricteds, lets you dictate play against a lot. It has a decent match against Urshifu if you want to flip on a different Terra. This is really good coverage. Like Dragon, Ice, Fire is great coverage. So I would put Kyurem. I would definitely put it in the B tier, Kyurem White. Again, there's not really any order in the tiers, but if there were, it'd be more up here. You know, I would say let's do a slight order here. Yeah, that's about where I'm looking. Whoa, there we go. There we go. You used Kyurem W back in India and went 4-4. The only Cali S I lost to was Moxie. Well, there you go. So yeah, I think it's a good mon. People definitely don't respect its matchups enough, so I like it. I think it's good. Let's take a look at Solgaleo. Solgaleo a mon I want to work on a little bit. In Reg G, I think it's actually better than people give it credit for because it has a really unique 97 base speed tier. Very, it's a lot higher than a lot of the other ones. It gets Sunseal Strike, which lets you ignore abilities, and it gets Full Metal Body, which is basically not inner focus, but it's make it so you're holding a clear amulet. You can build this thing with Policy, you can build it with Life Orb, you can build it with Cloak, a lot of different things. You can also build it with like safety goggles to be able to ignore Amoonguss and stuff like that. I think this mon's actually really good, and the cool thing about Solgaleo, it's gonna be a mon that's going to be a lot better when you get like dual restricted formats, is it gets access to Wide Guard and Trick Room. And I think that's really good. It lost superpower in this gen, which kind of sucks for it, but it gets access to like, I like to build my Solgaleo like this. This was the set that I used when I played Solgaleo. You play it like this, like hard checks Miraidon. You have like AoE for things like Shadow Rider, or Wide Guards for things like Shadow Rider, Trick Room for some speed control, and Sunsteel Strikes you do some good damage. I think it's a really cool mon. It's a really, really cool shiny as well. It's red. So I like Solgaleo a lot, but at the end of the day, it does require Terra to even hang with these mons up here, so it just gets to go in the B tier. Solid mon, but I do think that the fact that it isn't susceptible to Intimidate and can still exude its pressure against a lot of those other mons, I just don't see a reason to use like Solgaleo over like a Zenta in a lot of situations. If we're looking for like a big chonky mon that uses like steel damage sometimes as Wide Guard, like we have Zenta at home. Zenta's a good mon. Let's take a look at Lunala. Lunala's a little bit different than Solgaleo in that I think they have the same base speed tier. But Lunala is its own sort of playstyle. It's very different. So 97 base speed. Very, very solid mon. How'd you build it with Cloak? You just surround it with other mons that are good. You just have it on Cloak so they can't fake out you because you have no Protect. So it's the same as any other team. But yeah, I think Lunala is definitely like a viable mon. I like to build Lunala with Power Herb. Right here with like, actually you don't have to use a Power Herb, but like Power Herb sets are very popular. I definitely like to go Protect on Lunala. So like Protect's good, Calm Mind, and then like Moongeist Beam, and like, I don't know, like you pick another move, Moonblast is what a lot of people use, and they go like Fairy Terra, and then they go like lefties. And so this mon, it's different. It's the fully optimized form, because Shadow Shield's like a multi-scale, right? This is the best version of the Ho-Oh Eternatus like stall mon that you can't like ignore a Lunala forever, because it actually, after like 1 or 2 Calm Minds, it actually just starts killing things, right? And Fairy Terra Lunala is really, really solid as a defensive option because it's going to go basically neutral into most things. So I like Lunala a lot. I have a Lunala team that, you know, I guess I'll just show it right here. This is a team that I built for Indianapolis Regionals that one of my buddies used, but it's right there. It's like same thing, like Fairy Terra, Calm Mind Lunala, with Water Pond, a little bit of redirection, Urshifu. So they have to respect you going Trick Room. They have to respect you going Tailwind, sort of like a Tail Room balanced team with like Porygon and Sin. Very, very cool team. I like this one a lot. This is one of my favorite Lunala teams. I think you have a lot of options. And I think teams like that are really, really good in like best of 3 open team sheet play for understanding how your opponent handles matchups. Team was sick and performed well at Indy. Yeah, I liked the team a lot. I think it was really, really good. So, like, Lunala's in the B tier, but it would definitely be, like, up here. It's, like, so close to A tier. I just think the fact that you have to Terra in every matchup, you're going to have to Terra, right? Because people are going to be having Ghost moves and Dark moves to check Shadow Rider. So, like, they have their Sin with Knockoff. Every game, every single game, you will fight Knockoff and Sin, and it's going to be ass, right? Urshifu, Dark, and Water both give it problems because they break your first Shadow Shield tick with the first hit of the Surging Strikes, and then the next 2 do way too much. And the Wicked Blow, when still just like 2 taps you, and you have to go Terra, right? So it's like, good players know how to play around Lunala, but you have options against, like, Lunala will beat, like, all of these other ones. Even the Koraidon. Lunala will just say, like, you gotta be this tall to ride, bro. Like, if there was, like, a B tier plus, like, that would be Lunala and Koraidon, I would say. Maybe we should make another format. Maybe in the next tier list, we separate these tiers just a little bit differently. Go like a B plus tier, B minus tier. Let me know if you want to see something like that. So let's go into Duskmane. So Duskmane's a really cool mon. I like it a lot. It gets 77 base speed, which is slow. Slow enough to Trick Room, but still fast enough to outspeed a bunch of other things. 157 base stack, which is great. And the great respective defenses and a decent base HP. Prism Armor means you take a little bit less damage from super effective attacks. You can also utilize that with your Terra to go with the type that, like, let's say you Terra into, I don't know, something that, like, let's say you Terra Fire and then you like an Earthquake, you're going to take less damage, or, you know, Terra, they take like a Rock Attack, take less damage. I think it's really cool, mon. It doesn't get the Wide Guard that Solgo does, but it does get the Trick Room. Right, it does get access to the Sun Seal Strike, and this guy gets a lot of like really weird moves. It gets access to like Dragon Dance. You can build it physical or special with like, you know, what is it, Earth Power, a bunch of other stuff like that. He still gets like Heat Wave, Knockoff, Moonlight if you want Restoration. It gets a lot of different stuff. This is one of my favorite restricteds. I've used this at a lot of regionals over the years. I just think it's really cool, mon. It's a very, very chonky Trick Room setter. I would use this over Dialga in almost every single situation because, unlike Dialga, who still checks Calyrex Ice Rider with the Sunsteel Strike, this thing does the same job about checking the Cali Eye, but you don't have as many weaknesses here. You both take it takes less damage from Glacial Lance, right? Because Dialga takes it for neutral, this takes it resisted, and when they win the high horsepower, you take less damage on the Prism Armor. So people like to play this with like Clear Amulet and a couple other filler moves. I like this mon. You kind of build it the same way this you want to play Solgaleo. Very, very chunky, very bulky. Again, I still think it's a B tier mon. So it doesn't really get to do anything different, but it would definitely be more like up here. I like it a lot. It is susceptible to Intimidate if they knock off your Clear Amulet, which is one of the problems with it. But at the end of the day, like, it's one of those mons that can just invalidate some of these weaker restricteds. Take a look at Dawn Wings. I don't like Dawn Wings as much as Duskmane or Lunala, just because it still has the same Prism Armor, but it still has that 4 times weakness. And this guy tends to be built a little bit more with like Expanding Force, like full special, like 157 base special attack. This is the one you see built with Meteor Beam most often. So they go like, they have like Trick Room, it has like the Moon Geist Beam, and then they have like they have the Meteor Beam, right? So it's like more of a Cheesemon. It's built on like Psy Spam and stuff like that. But yeah, I think that it's decent. It's definitely better than things like Reshiram and Zekrom, but it's definitely like one-dimensional. And if you get the tempo up and you bring this out in the mid game when you already have your speed control up, it can just end the game right there. But the hard part is like getting to that point in the game without utilizing your restricted is really rough. So again, it just goes in the B tier. And we're not going to cover like these guys. I think that these guys are where the D tier would be. Regular Necrozma is fine, but there isn't a reason to use a regular Necrozma over either of the other ones I mentioned. Regular Kyurem's fine, but there's no reason to use regular Kyurem over any of the Kyurem forms that I mentioned. Nebbies both suck. And then while you can use like an item on your Zacian, like a Choice Scarf or a Life Orb or a Choice Band or a Clear Amulet or whatever, I'm just not going to rank them because like you shouldn't be using those over their other forms. Let's take a look at their regular forms, or their crowned forms, sorry, and see where that we're going to put them. So we have Zacian here. You see the difference between them is like the crowned Zacian gets 10 more base speed, 30 more base attack, and they both get the Intrepid Sword ability. Like you can use like Sash regular Zacian if you want to be that guy. I just don't think there's like a real reason to, because like getting the steel, when you use the crown form, you also get access to Behemoth Blade as a stab move, and it's a lot of damage. The way I like to play this Zacian is to build it with like a Zacian team with like Shenpao, and then what I really like to do is use it with like Gothitelle. so you can actually trap people, because the way the Zacian works is when it comes in, it gets the Intrepid Sword boost, which is 1.5 attack, and then if you have like Sacred Sword, even if they led with Sin, you can just fake out their Sin and neutralize it, and then you just go Helping Hand with your Goth, and you just pop their Sin. The problem with this team is it's all one-dimensional attackers, so if they have like double redirection mons, like if they have like an Electabuzz on like a Trick Room team, and then they also send out like an Amoonguss or an Entity as a second redirector, you're going to be really, really pinned, because all your damage is single target. You could add something like a Flutter and a Chi-Yu to bring a little bit of AoE to the core, right? But at the same time, like it's just kind of rough. So I don't really think that it's like the right way to play Zacian. I like to play Zacian kind of with like, you really just hope that they don't have double redirection you're playing for your matchups, because like Zacian is a decent matchup against a lot of these mons, and it can 1v1 almost all the other restricteds. If you go like Stellar Terra, Helping Hand, they have to 1v1 you, mate. So like I like Zacian, but it's just a B tier mon because it does lose to so much of the, I would say, like redirections. Like it's one of those mons that like can get slowed down by like passive play, and it can get Intimidate cycled. It's susceptible to Fake Out. So it's not as good as it used to be, because you don't get the double damage on Behemoth Blade like you did in Sword and Shield, but like it's still usable. I like Zacian. It would definitely be up here for me. It would be the very top of the B tier, I would say, just because I use Zacian in Indianapolis Regionals. I liked it a lot. Diamond More Than 5 took a variant of my Indianapolis Regionals team and made day 2 in Los Angeles with it. So it's a good mon, but it does get, it's able to be influenced too heavily by non-restricted mons. Let's talk about Zenta. I think Zenta is a mon that people are very, very passionate about right now. So Zenta here. So Zamazenta crowned. It gets the defense boost. 140, 140, 120, 128. It's so good. This mon is like the balance king right now. And you tend to play this guy with stuff like Urshi. You can play like full balance if you want, but like they tend to be played with like Urshi, like Urshi Waters. You still have like a Rillaboom on this team to be able to have a little bit of terrain control for the Miraidon matchup. So you can just pivot in your Rilla, take away the Miraidon's terrain, and then just start outvaluing. It gets access to like Wide Guard if you want to use it. It gets access to things like Iron Defense and Body Press. And then it also has like Heavy Slam, which is better than its other move, Behemoth Bash, in a lot of situations. Heavy Slam is a little bit better, I would say. Just because you get more of it, you can get PP stalled by pressure mons if you're using Behemoth Bash. So I think it's a really, really good mon. People tend to play it with like a little bit of speed control too. Sometimes use Whimsicott or Tornadus. I think it's very, very solid. Oh, you also still see Shenpao here a lot of the time, because Shenpao shreds their defenses, which means when you're using these mons, you can actually still pin them correctly. So I think Zenta is really, really good. I would put Zenta in the A tier. Zenta is going to be an A tier mon because it has a good enough matchup versus Miraidon. It has a good matchup against Terapagos. It is usable against things like Shadow Rider, because you can have Wide Guard for things like Shadow Rider and Ice Rider and Kyogre. So you're starting to see a pattern where Zenta can like hang with these other ones. It's not forced to Terra. That's a big thing. It can fight all these without wasting its Terra, and it like low-key checks the crap out of like all these other ones. So Zenta's really, really good. You're going to see a lot of Zenta. It is like the, if we're taking a look at what was popular in Reg H and the playstyle that was popular in Reg H with balance, Zenta is like the mon that facilitates that playstyle the best in this format, because it's basically the Arch Halidon of this format. It kind of just sits around and says like, when you finally mess up, I got you. And it's just a really, really good mon. You can play on close sheep, open sheep, wherever you want to play it. Zenta's going to be the neutral, like restricted that you can take into a lot of matchups. And I would say Zenta's like worst matchup are like other really, really, really aggressive teams and other Zentas in some situations. But for the most part, you can fight most things with it. Take a look at Eternatus. Eternatus, some people would say. Eternatus is the best pressure mon in the format. Pressure is still a good ability, especially in these restricted formats. A lot of these single moves, like these special moves that each mons get, they only get 8. So if you can wait like 3 or 4 turns with pressure, you can outvalue. So it gets access to Cosmic Power, which is going to give you a 1 boost to your defense and your SpDef. Gets access to Recover. You can also build it with like a Power Herb, like Meteor Beam set if you want to be that guy. But most people just tend to have like a Dynamax Cannon here, which is like a solid like damaging move. Sometimes they go like Sludge Bomb to be able to put a little bit of a timer. Sometimes people even cut one of these and put like things like Flamethrowers to have coverage for Steel, and they go like a Toxic. Like this is a common set here too. But you can even just go Toxic on this guy. And with the way this team likes to play is you get 1 or 2 KOs, and then instead of them timing you, you time them, because your whole board is built with like supporting this Eternatus, and it's facilitating such like value over the course of the game. It's usually built like lefties or Citrus, and they usually go Dark Terra, so they don't have that auto loss to like Shadow Rider. I think it's a good mon. And what's good about each unit is it's a 130 base speed. So even like uninvested, very similar to Lugia, it outspeeds a lot of different things. Look at that stat line. Like 140 base HP means you don't need to put that many points into it. You can just throw most your points like here, right? In those sort of places, right? And then from here, like you have extra points to do whatever you want with. You're still chunking people with the special attacks that you do have, and you're not dying to like anything. You're just kind of sitting around, stacking boosts, utilizing Rillaboom terrains, things like that, and never really dying. So it's a pretty easy restricted to play. And what you're going to see a lot of times is people are going to try and like roll you over. They're going to miss their rolls, lose a piece, and then not be able to come back. So it's a good restricted. I don't think it's like S tier, A tier, but if you take a look at it, it has like a decent matchup into Zenta, decent matchup into Ogre, decent matchup into Terapagos, decent into Miraidon. It forces them to go Draco. And if you already have the one causing power off, you're fine. The issue with this guy, though, is very similar to Ho-Oh, is that you can time it if you know what you're doing. And because it's so reactive, going for Cosmic Power, eventually you're going to crit. You can take out all its teammates, make it fight like a 1 versus 3 or 4. You can crit it. It's also really susceptible to taunt. Fake out cycling is very good into it. It also has a really bad matchup, I would say, into Kali I. You can Terra, but at the same time, if you Terra early, you have to Terra into like Dark or some other weird typing to not auto lose some of these other things. So it's like you just die like to the Kali I. So I think Kali I just outvalues it a little bit too hard. And we're gonna take a look at Shadow Rider and Kali Ice as our last two mons. Haze just pops. Well, it's like Haze isn't really popular in this format though. It's not. Like there's not really any Haze users that are really viable here. Let's take a look at Shadow Rider. Shadow Rider is busted. So Shadow Rider gets the as one abilities, just like its respective counterpart, the Ice Rider. And it's going to give you, I think it's funny. It says this combination of Unnerve and Grimnail, like it knows what those are. But Unnerve says no berries can be used on your opponent's side. And Grimnail says whenever you get a KO, you get a +1 boost to your special attack. So it has a 165, 150, and it gets Astral Barrage, which is a 120 base spread moves. It hits both your opponent's mons and it can't miss. It can be played with like Expanding Force. It can be played with like Nasty Plot. This thing's commonly built like either Sash or like Citrus. When it's built Citrus, it's usually built a little bit more with like Fairy Terra, you know, Draining Kiss play as on like a bulk balance team as like the one mon that can kind of just come out. So it'd be built something like that, and then you'd have like either an Encore, or you'd have like a Nasty Plot, or you'd have even something like a Sub or like a Calm Mind, right? On a set like this, and they have like a Citrus Berry here, and you just play like a little bit more of like a value game where you're just stacking boosts and trying to like go get them with like just the Shadow Rider. You're gonna flip that one turn where they don't have the right speed tier to cover up the fact that like you have a 150 base speed mon with like 165. You get that one KO with your Astral or something like that, and then from there you just roll them with Shadow Rider. It's a very, very good balance mon, and if you take a look at Shadow Rider, right, it checks this, it outspeeds, bad matchup here, decent matchup here, decent matchup here, good. Every one of these matchups, like Shadow Rider just crushes it, right? Shadow Rider just absolutely folds all these over, because what Shadow Rider does is it puts their restricted at a situation where you will two-shot them, while also at the same time killing their non-restricted mon. So you kill them, get a +1, put their restricted in a situation where you tap them again. They trade with you, but you're Sash and you just do it again, right? That's how it works. Or if you have like correct redirection or damage mitigation, that you play Protect the Shadow Rider, and Shadow Rider folds everyone in 2 turns. So it's a really, really good mon. It's obviously S tier. Checks like everything. If there was no Terapagos in this format, every single mon would have like 5 normal Terras on it. Or every team would have like 5 normal Terras on it, so you don't just auto lose the Shadow Rider. So let's take a look at Calyrex Ice as the last mon. This is the foil to Shadow Rider. And note that Calyrex Ice has a weakness to Shadow Rider, in that it's a Psychic type, right? It's a Psychic Ice type. So it has that weakness to Shadow Rider. These are usually built Clear Amulet and built on like Trick Room teams. So you'd see like Protect, Trick Room. This is the restricted that I took to the World Championships because I believe that it has the most amount of neutral or better matchups. Because all you gotta do is if like the only one of these restricteds that really gives you a problem if you have the right teammates is Shadow Rider, and maybe to some extent Zenta. If you just flip on a Terra that doesn't lose the Shadow like a normal Terra, now you're in a situation where like you check this, you check this, you check this, you check this. This is still spicy, but like you can outplay it. You check this. They're all just folding over. It's like it's a safe. It's the highest base stat mon that gets Trick Room, right? So, and it deals massive AoE damage with Glacial Lance. Same thing as your Shadow Rider, and if you get that one Grim Naboosh, you just win the game. So I really, really like this restricted, and I think you have the best neutral or better matchups against the widest variety of things. So I'm going to put it in the A tier, and the reason it's not in the S tier is because stuff like Zenta is still really popular. I think that the fact that Zenta is really popular and you're forced to Terra to stop the Shadow Rider means that like it can be a little bit reactive. I also think that it's very teammate reliant, and the fact that it has to basically be played in Trick Room means that you're a little bit more locked into a one-dimensional play style. I also think that like because Calyrex can low-key get like walled or slowed down significantly by like Water Terra Amoonguss and Pelipper, 2 mons that are not restricted, it kind of caps it for being that S tier mon that dictates play. It's a little bit too reactive. Your opponent can definitely flowchart matchups to deal with Cali-I, but it's up to you to have the right teammates around Cali-I. Like I've used Raging Bolt, I've used Mind Shao, Ogerpon Grass, and those are mons that definitely worked for me when utilizing Cali-I. So that's my tier list. What do you guys think? What do you guys think of my tier list? Do you guys agree or disagree? Would you like to see more tier lists every week or so going over any potential changes? I think what we probably could do is we could make like a B+ or B- tier to where we can rank these guys a little bit easier. Cali's been the only restricted I've really struggled against in Reg G. Yeah, I mean, Calyrex invalidates a lot of like tech that most people want to use. If you want to be the Cali-I player that says, I'm going redirection Trick Room, and you have to outplay me in the late game, a lot of people will fumble the bag and just want to win early. And when you don't want them to win early, they miss it, right? Zacian B tier just makes me see how power creep has come along. It's not even that power creep. Like, it's Zacian's, its existence was made to be in a different meta. Like, Behemoth Blade was balanced to be able to check Dynamax mons. Those aren't in the game. The fact that Zacian's still usable is like ridiculous. And it got nerfed, right? So it's like, it's still a usable mon. But yeah, that's my tier list. I will say if you guys got this far in the video and you appreciate this sort of content, please think about checking out the singles channel. We're trying our best, like I said, to get to 500 subs before Christmas. We're almost there. We're almost there. I literally just talked my ass off for like an hour and a half about VGC stuff. And if you guys want to see the same sort of content for singles as well as some, Battle Stadium content, 6v6 content, we're running some tournaments as well, think about dropping a sub on the singles channel. It's completely free to do that. And yeah. That's all I got for you guys today.